Welcome to the Journey of an Aesthete podcast, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human.
Can you hear me? How do I sound?
You sound great, Andrew.
Excellent. How are you?
I'm good this morning. Can you hear me okay and everything?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's important.
Yeah.
Wow, Andrew Bujalski. It's been a while, hasn't it? Since
It has.
I am going to this is for those that don't know, this is Andrew Bujalski. This is a guest that I'm really, really honored to have. It's very hard to introduce this particular guest because of his contribution to cinema is well, it's quite a contribution. I think it was in 2002, I stumbled upon Funny Haha, your first feature. And I have to say that at the time, I was blown away by this film. I was really impressed with its intimacy and in some ways, this film was, as you've said in interviews, a classical film, an old-fashioned film. But in other ways, in terms of American filmmaking at that time, I don't think anybody was doing stylistically what you were doing and on that level. Perhaps not at least since John Cassavetes was doing sort of similar things. And there was a sweetness to that film and an optimism and a beauty and mainly, I would say, the subtlety of the interactions. The film was sort of about relationships between people, but in a completely natural way and not a manufactured way. And, it's sort of a cliche to talk about movies or art being plot-driven versus character-driven. But if any film was character-driven and dialogue-driven, it was Funny Haha. And it sort of, I think... changed American cinema and has a great influence, continues to have a great influence on other filmmakers. We could talk about that. So that was the beginning, and then there was Mutual Appreciation and Beeswax, and last year, your latest film is Support the Girls, which is fantastic, which everybody should go out and see immediately or stream or however you're going to watch it. And before we start, Andrew, I wanted to thank you for using so much of my music in your films over the years.
Thank you.
Namely, I think Beeswax. I think the biggest thing was Computer Chess, right? Because Computer Chess.
That was great.
Yeah, I composed a piece called 1979 for that film, and that's an incredible film as well. I mean, of course, we could talk about. We're gonna, if you don't mind, get into the weeds and discuss details about your experiences. Sure. Making these wonderful films, and what I always like to do in these shows thus far is start with a linear chronology, and then out of that linear chronology we could become less linear and kind of get sort of improv. But so as a foundation, we'll start from the biographical chronology and then see what happens. And I'm going to kind of defer to you since you're the guest and your vision is what's important on this particular show, since it's about Andrew Bujalski. And so I guess we could start, with your experience. I guess it was at Harvard, correct? And Rob Moss and Chantal Akerman, because I think that your roots were there. And, of course, Chantal Akerman is a rest in peace, is a major filmmaker. And did you want to start there or talk about something else? What comes to mind if you want to talk about...
Oh, whatever you like. But yeah, I mean, I had an extraordinary gaggle of mentors there. The two that you mentioned, also a guy named Dick Rogers.
Oh wow!
And Dusan Makaveyev. So that really an extraordinary lineup, and four quite diverse voices, but all of whom will echo in my head certainly for as long as I'm making films. that was an extraordinary privilege to, in part, some of it was, I think people think of these things in terms of instruction or what lesson did you learn or what great nugget of wisdom did they give you, and there certainly were those things, but more than anything, I think it was just being around artists, being around people who were that seriously devoted to what they were doing, all with different motivations and different reasons, but just for really, really great filmmakers and really great people. I learned as much, I think, just from being around them as human beings and how they conducted their lives and how they integrated their work into their lives, I think, and as I did from anything they told me about anything technical.
Right. So it's both technical and spiritual, you might say. Well,
sure.
since there's that many, because I had forgotten I'd forgotten you'd worked with director of Sweet Movie, and I'm right. So, my familiarity, I did not know at the time that you would study with Chantal Akerman. Mm-hmm. I only learned that later. Even though I've been watching her films for many years, I think I knew more about Rob Moss because he's a regular fixture there. And what was that department? It was environmental audio.
Environmental studies wasn't it? They just changed the name this year. I can't remember the new name. It's something a lot more direct. I think they got tired of trying to answer people's questions about what does that mean. It was a very 70s name for the department, Visual and Environmental Studies. What's that?
Knowing me, that's one of the things I liked about that department was that it was named that. Yeah, but. But go ahead. So because I think that department had a mission, from what I understand. Again, I'm an outsider, and this may have had an influence on your filmmaking practice. In fact, I know it did. I think it had a mission about this intimacy I talked about camera getting in there and documenting things as they're unfolding in the present with a present-minded orientation. Is that true? That was a kind of an overarching?
That sounds right. Yeah, and I think there is a clear tradition and lineage. Rob Moss, for decades now, Rob Moss and Alfred Gazzetti have really been the backbone of that department. Ross McElwee as well, and Rob and Ross at least both come out of the old MIT Media Lab, and so there's a whole lineage tradition going back through Pennebaker, Ricky Leacock, all the great cinema verite. Cinema tradition, and that, as far as I know, still kind of lives on there. That's still those were the fumes we were coasting off of. But I've always felt, in retrospect, and this may be my having drank Kool-Aid there, but documentary was the backbone of everything. Even though at a certain point we were allowed freedom to go do whatever we wanted, and there was quite a bit. You could go make narrative work. There was always very cool stuff going on in animation, and a lot of experimental work. But I think my sense of the department was that documentary was at the core of it all, which is still how I think about making in general. Because I think documentary teaches maybe the most important lesson in filmmaking, which is that you don't control everything, and that you're always, any film you go to make, no matter what kind of film it is, you're going to, you have to bring ideas to it. You have to bring a plan, and then you also have to be ready for your ideas and plans to get blown up in your face. In a very stark fashion, documentary teaches you that, because the footage you've got is not always the footage you thought you were going to get. And I think once you learn to grapple with that you apply that to everything you do as a filmmaker, and anything you do creatively. I think you have to learn that lesson.
Well, that's very interesting, because I think, and I'm no expert, although I do consider myself a cinephile, but I'm not an expert, say, like you are, making work in that medium. It always occurred to me that there were some really amazing artists in film, and they could have been fiction feature filmmakers who have documentary roots. Is this not true? Can you think? I'm sure. Isn't there a tradition of that in cinema where so that the line between fiction on the one hand and documentary has always been a sort of dubious line, right?
Yeah, although I mean, I think it's more, there's a commercial tradition of you're kind of on one side or the other, but I think you're absolutely right, and certainly Harvard attracts more of those people who find that more porous, and Makaveyev and Akerman are both like two extraordinary examples of people who could land on either side of that and still bring the exact same aesthetic to it. I mean, an Akerman movie is an Akerman movie, whether it's a musical comedy or experimental documentary. Her eye is very specific, and so yeah. I mean, there's kind of, I think, in the States at least, there tends to be a business tradition that those don't mix. But yeah, there are plenty of filmmakers who.
That's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, because when I saw results, by the way, there's a lot of misinformation about your films. People tend to exaggerate the differences between these films too much, but they're stylistically, like for me, Results is the same as Computer Chess, is the same as Support the Girls. But anyhow, as an aside to that, I felt watching that was kind of like when Chantal Akerman did the 80s or window shopping.
Yeah.
Those musicals you talked about, that Results was kind of like your musical, kind of like you're about these exercise buffs in this gym. That was with the electronic sort of soundtrack, which I like very much in that, almost an 80s soundtrack, and the cutting. I mean, the thing to me about art that's really exciting is that our art really challenges these separations of style and genre, doesn't art? It's art making itself is sort of like a big, kind of monkey wrench saying, hey, who are you going to label me, or what's in a category, what's in a definition? And I think artists sometimes are really oppressed by these industry labels and categories. It's almost like, if the film is good is what matters. It doesn't have to, if it could be a Western, it could be a movie, a document of your classmates. But if it's moving and if it's intelligently made, that's what matters, rather than the box or the that you put it in, or that, right? Wouldn't you say?
I certainly feel that way, although, plenty of people would disagree with us and have become very wealthy disagreeing with us. It's just different modes of looking at these things. But yeah, I have trouble. I have the idea of kind of submitting to genre is always something I've struggled with. I mean, I like genre, and in Results certainly was an example of going to a genre and treating it as a playground. And Lord knows, we can sit here all day and talk about deep genre movies that you and I both love. Yeah. But the idea that I'm going to go to the rule book and follow the rule book, and people are going to take pleasure from an execution of the rule, it's not really my skill set. I think there are people who certainly please audiences that way.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about what your skill set is or isn't, because it's funny because there are things in Results that deliver those conventions, right? Wouldn't you say, like Results? Sure. Like I found Results very entertaining. Colby Smulders and I forget the name. And the actors in there are certainly engaging. There's a lot of comedy, and there's a lot of very relatable comedy in that. That's totally like the things that you would see on, say, Lena Dunham's Girls. I mean, in terms of both in terms of style and appeal. But I guess not everybody sees that. They kind of say, "Oh, well, you didn't deliver here," or "You did." It's very strange. So yeah, it's kind of a.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, genre is a harsh mistress that way. I think it was funny to me having made that movie back to back with, well, not quite back to, but I did Computer Chess, and then I pretty quickly. It's actually the quickest turnaround I've done. 2 years between movies, and Computer Chess was, and just in the abstract, it was the least commercial thing I could imagine. I was kind of going out of my way to do nothing that the marketplace was asking for, and do something that was kind of, resolutely, painfully avant-garde to a degree, although it's still, I think it is still certainly a narrative that's not that hard to find your way into. But I did that, and then I did Results, which was obviously playing on some very conventional things. I mean, first and foremost, that I was going to cast well-known, well-liked, very gorgeous actors to play fitness instructors and have them kiss each other at the end of the movie. Like these things that seemed to a degree, maybe even a parody of conventionality. But those movies, I think, were essentially received as equally bizarre. And I learned some lesson there that you can borrow from convention and you can dress convention up, but if you don't adhere strictly to convention, people will notice, and the people who wanted strict convention will be annoyed by it, and even maybe more annoyed than they would be by computer chess, which they either kind of take or leave. Computer chess was certainly the most fun I've ever had marketing a movie, because it was the only one that we couldn't misrepresent in the marketing. It was so weird that all you could do was say, "Hey, this is weird," so you invite the weirdos to show up for it. Whereas every other movie I've done, you could make a trailer that made it look sort of like a normal movie, and I always uncomfortable with that.
Well, computer chess, being part of that movie, I think I was so honored. That's just one of a kind, is putting it mildly. It was actually, I read a piece on you that calls that your masterpiece. I think I read something, I don't remember where I read that. I like all of your films.
Sure.
But I think computer chess, there is something special about it. I think to begin with, I think the analog did you use Betamax video recorders?
No, it was old Sony cameras, even pre-Betamax. So
you shot
some of the first.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, the Sony cameras. It was the ADC 3260, which was that was the precursor of the Portapak, which was the kind of the first semi-commercially available consumer video camera in the late 60s, early 70s. But although it wasn't really for consumers, a lot of schools had them, and it's a unique look. Part of what I loved about it was that technology was such a blip. There was only 10 years or less where that was really out, and it was never commercially dominant. So, the images you see, I think, are very, very, very particular to that era. And I like that. It was the best shortcut ever for period filmmaking. We did more to evoke that period just by turning that camera on.
That's right.
Than spending millions of dollars on production design or anything you would do in that sense.
That movie is really costume drama. I don't have to tell you. People think that movie is from 1980. They think it's like an actual computer chess convention that was documented, right? Some people, right? Is that not true? That they were fooled to that?
Yeah, no, I've certainly heard plenty of people say that when they started the movie, they assumed it was documentary. It's hard to imagine getting to the end of it and still feeling like you watch it.
Yeah. So to go back, not to get too far ahead, do you want to go back to Funny Haha and talk about the genesis of these stylistic things, or what you were doing in terms of a relationship picture or movie about these young people in their 20s? What comes to mind working with Kate Dolomire or any of the actors, or what shooting that was like, or the conception, anything that comes to mind, whatever, about making that wonderful thing?
I think recently it struck me, whatever it was, I live in Austin, Texas now, and as you know, there was a long period where I was living and working in Boston again, but I did it was about 20 years ago that I first moved down to Austin, and I only lived here for about a year and change at that time. But Dolomire was one of my roommates at that time. I was just a year or two out of college, and I knew I wanted to make films because it was the only thing it's still the only thing I've ever wanted to do, for better and or worse. And I'd gone to Harvard and I studied filmmaking and I'd done student work there. And when I got out of school, I tried to do whatever I could do to earn not much money. My first job out of school was teaching a high school film studies class. I stumbled right into that, and I did a lot of temp work and the kind of stuff you see in Funny Haha, just bill paying stuff. But during that time, I was writing, and I wrote 2 or 3 or 4 screenplays, which I think were not particularly good, but I didn't I couldn't quite imagine what it would take, what the leap would be to get from sitting in my room trying to write these things to actually, I didn't know what it would be to make it or how to make it. I had enough of a background, both from my schooling and also just from watching indie movies.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of going and making something and not trying to go up to Hollywood and climb sort of ladder. But these scripts I was writing at the time, I couldn't imagine devoting my life to making them, because I knew I knew it would take everything I had. And then living in Austin, living with Kate as a roommate, and she was and is one of the most charismatic people I've ever met. And then certainly at that time too, with all people were so drawn to her.
Yeah.
And I had this notion that I could write something for her to play the lead in, and if my hunch was right, then I would have this great trick, this great shortcut to holding people's attention on screen. Which would be this very magnetic lead and somebody who, if I could build the right kind of part for her, I mean, obviously I had a hunch. I did not know how good she would be, because she wasn't a professional actor. Yeah. I think she turned up and she had done some small roles in Friends student films, because she was a Harvard person too, and we'd been together. So she had acted before, but certainly not anything like this. And she's phenomenally good.
We all agree. I mean, it's amazing. I'm sure you hear a lot of people saying it's one of the great performances of an actress in cinema of the early 2000s, and it's somebody who's actually an animator, right? Her profession is, I believe, is animation.
Well, that's what she had been studying in school in Yemen, and she was at CalArts doing experimental filmmaking. She works as an archivist now.
Oh, excellent. That's a major theme of my show, is that someone will do a performance like she did in that film like that, but they will archive film. They'll do a cartoon. They'll save celluloid. So it's all one. All the arts are one, and I'm very excited hearing about all these. The fact that you're not putting people in boxes and putting people in them, which I don't like. So I'm trying to resist that as much as I can. So that's great. So she gave this performance, but you didn't know that while you were shooting what you had in that sense, or you did, or you had a sense, or.
Oh, I thought. I mean, I felt like it was going to work.
Yeah. So, funny, haha. Mm-hmm. Is there anything more you want to say about the other misconception? Of course, I always like to clear up misconceptions and misperceptions on my show, and one of them is this thing about writing versus improvisation. Mm-hmm. Your films are written. You're a writer. You're scripted.
Yes, although I'm certainly not averse to throwing improvisation and oddities on top of that. And so I always struggled with that question, because I think the question often comes in the form, how much is scripted and how much is improvised, like as if there's a kind of formula or percentage. And I tend to think of acting in general as improvisation. Even if you're doing Shakespeare or David Mamet or something where it's you can't alter a word per se, but it comes out differently every time. It's supposed to, and you're supposed to learn from it. You're supposed to be alive and listening in the moment. So whether or not there's any ad-libbing per se going on, and there certainly are moments in all my movies, and I'm sure more so in the early ones, where words come out of people's mouths that perhaps are not precisely what was on the page, but it always followed the structure of what was on the page. I've never gone into something without a pretty clear and pretty nailed down sense of structure, and then from there, what happens. And that was one thing I liked about working with non-professional actors, is that, and everyone's different, by the way, no matter their background. You find some non-professionals really do want to get the words exactly right, and some professionals don't mind goofing off. But
so interesting.
Yeah, but in general, for sure, with non-professionals, especially on that first movie, I mean, the real joy and great luck of that first movie, I think what brings it to life is that nobody was precious about it. I think everybody was serious, everybody was committed, everybody was trying to do a good job. But nobody was there to advance their career. Nobody was there. I'm not sure how to put this quite right, but there's. I never felt like I think it was the right kind of respectfulness of the material. Something which is to say, it was not. Nobody was overly respectful of it. We couldn't have been. We were all kids, and we were all just.
I mean, I guess
together. There's something that happens when you get to a certain kind of professional level where because it is the nature of a professional relationship, people treat you and the material very respectfully, which is nice, but also not necessarily as creative as when you just really all feel like you're in the soup together.
If I were going to evoke it from the outside as someone who's seen that film many times and mutual appreciation, I think part of it could be your writing, because it's very hard to write as you do. Because I think people fail to appreciate that because you before you go into production, the subtleties between the people is written into the script and sort of executed in such a way that it actually unfolds in terms of the performances. Now, I don't know how you do that. That's your gift. But you do that, and I sort of feel like... But I think part of it, what you're talking about, is balance. So you're saying on Funny Ha, and then when we get to mutual appreciation, that's Brooklyn, right? And some of the same people. So do you want to talk about your style unfolding and your practice in terms of that, or what comes to mind about that, or along the
well, we were. I was still young, hadn't lost that yet, and I was eager to jump in again. I was eager to, to maybe change up the formula a little bit. Not that there was a formula, but in the first movie, I was relying so heavily on Kate, that I had this person who I thought was charismatic, who I wanted to follow around in every scene of the movie, and it was kind of, I think that was me trying to make what I thought of as a French movie.
Well, it is. I mean, no, seriously. I mean, it's like some of Rivette. I'm sure you hear this. It's actually more Rivette than Romer, actually, which is so you succeeded in that. But anyhow, go ahead. I just want to throw that out there. But,
well, I do remember, in my pretentious film student-y way, I remember with the first one thinking that was my French movie, and the second one thinking, okay, now I'm making an Italian movie, which means long party scenes.
Yep.
And that was a lot of fun to do. And again, I was writing for a former roommate, for Justin Rice, who I'd lived with. But a different kind of bag of tricks, very different character and very different structure, where I was going to spend a lot of time with him, but I was going to open it up a little bit and have, this trio at the center of it. It was still certainly about young people and the concerns of young people, but the focus of it felt different. Working in black and white felt different, felt great.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we were very lucky to get away with it again.
What is it you thought you were getting away with in terms of the photography, or the whole
thing? To make movies at all, and certainly to make movies fairly a ton. I mean, I've been very spoiled. I'm in my 40s now, and I'm 6 movies in, and of course things have changed, and I have more financial pressure in my daily life now. I have children, I have a mortgage, and these things. But I've still always been in a position where my movies, I've had final cut on 6 movies, and there are very few filmmakers who
can say that
get final cut on 1 movie, let alone 6.
Yeah, I'm happy for you actually that's been the case. I mean, if you're going to talk about your most Support the Girls, again, feels like your early work. It really, really does. I mean, I get frustrated with critics that don't see the commonality. So you're staying true to your vision, even though there are the subject matter, of course, is different. It's this sports bar with girls that work there clad a certain way and dress a certain way, and sort of it's a certain environment of the suburbs. Those are differences, but underneath those differences, there's the commonality, there's a human heart commonality. I think. In terms of how you approach the material, but so on mutual appreciation, so you finish that, and then what do you feel about the reception of that versus funny haha? Do you feel that this is starting to take off and people are starting to respond to what you're doing at that time, or?
Well, opening weekend felt exciting, but funny haha had such a long, strange arc. We finished that movie in 2002. And I remember clearly, at the time, it was already archaic, but the first finished version of that was 3 reels of a 16mm print, which was already, by 2002, not that easy to get shown anywhere, But I remember holding it in my hands. 3 reels of 16, you can kind of clutch it to your chest.
Yeah.
And I remember holding it and thinking, what now? I hadn't planned past making the movie. Everything I'd had for the years that it took to do that was in finishing the movie, and there was really no energy, no thought had gone into how to get it screened. And so I started looking up film festivals and submitting pretty much willy-nilly to wherever and getting rejected from everywhere. And there were about 6 months where I didn't know if the movie would ever be seen. And then that dam kind of broke, and in fact it was Gerald Perry in Boston who programmed the first ever public screening at the Coolidge Corner.
Yeah.
And we started to go to a few regional film festivals from there, and it just had this weird kind of, it kept getting buoyed along every time I thought it was over. I think after we played 3 regional festivals, I thought, well, that was nice. That's probably it. This movie's probably dead. But then we go to another one, and then we get a good review somewhere. We played the Los Angeles, what was it called? It was called I'm blanking on this. It was the Indie Film Festival in LA.
That's right.
Now, I'm forgetting the name of it now. Maybe it was just Los Angeles Independent Film Festival, but and we got a good review in Variety, and so then that. Oh yeah, that'll. Then you get the Hollywood people. Yeah. I don't know. Asking you for a cassette of your movie. And this is also sent for VHS tapes. Yeah. And then we won an award. We won a thing at the Independent Spirit Awards, and so it kept having a little bit of life in it. And in 2005, 3 years after we finished it, independent, somebody who was not in the movie business, but who had a little bit of money to throw around and wanted to see the film released, backed us in self-distributing it. So we had an investor who wanted to help us do that. We put it in theaters ourselves. So that film was still kind of chugging along while I was making Mutual Appreciation. Yeah.
So it's good to have the chemistry of these two different films working in a way, supporting each other, right? So what you're saying is the fact that there was somewhat of a lengthy, I won't say torturous, but lengthy kind of volatile post-production history. Funny how it turned out to be a good thing because it actually, am I right? It actually helped Mutual Appreciation in a way, energy-wise. I don't know.
No, I think you're right, and it gave the illusion that I was prolific, so yeah, for sure, there was more of an impression that I guess it was easier to get people's attention when they knew there were 2 films up there, and when Mutual Appreciation opened in New York, we actually did, by our standards, well. I remember we had big line on Friday night in New York City, and we didn't necessarily expect that. Of course, none of these things made like real money, but it was nice to feel like we were big shots for a weekend.
So you weren't expecting the crowds for Mutual Appreciation. That was becoming this phenomenon, and
no, but we got good reviews, and people turned up that opening weekend. It was exciting.
And so what comes to mind after that? So after mutual appreciation, then what comes into your consciousness about the aftermath of that and what happens next?
It's hard to reconstruct. It was then the illusion of prolificness died off. I think then it took a while to get the next one together, but I was, and in part because so much time was going into the release of these movies, and that we did self-distribute the first two. So for all the dreams I'd had as a kid of wanting to make movies, wanting to, I dreamed of writing and directing and even acting, but never of distributing. Yeah. But then, I wanted to kind of take one more whack at this kind of filmmaking, and I was dreaming of this movie for the Hatcher sisters, for Maggie and Tilly Hatcher.
Beeswax.
Yes. And gradually kind of found our way to that. We ended up shooting that in 2007. It didn't premiere until 2009 because I was a slow editor. And that ended up certainly changing the course of my life because we shot that in Austin, Texas. I thought I would, so I returned to Austin where I lived years earlier when I was writing Funny Haha. And I thought I would just be here for a few months making the movie. But much to my surprise, I started dating my wife, and so that was a good excuse to move back. So after shooting the movie, I came back to Boston for a few months, but then ended up moving back here to be with Karen and finished editing here. And we premiered it here. Oh, that's not true. We premiered it in Berlin, but then the following month at South by Southwest in 2009.
And in Beeswax, you had some piano music of mine, a trio.
Yeah.
Thing, which I really like the way you. That's another thing is that you use what they call the non-diegetic or diegetic music, just music that's in the story rather than commentary music, which that's actually exciting. But so you're saying Beeswax was had more appeal than mutual appreciation. That was kind of a positive.
More appeal?
Well, positive in terms of its reception, that it was that.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that. I actually think Beeswax was, I still think probably, of all the things I've done, probably the least seen and the least, well, certainly box office, which is no real indicator, but I think at that point, we were kind of it's just a strange, quiet movie. I saw it again, we actually did a 10th anniversary screening here in Austin, and we got the Hatcher sisters came for it, and Alice Kapowski came for it, and it was really, really a delight to see those people. And then I watched the movie with that group for the first time in a while, and it was really exciting and sweet to watch it, but also, of course, I was struck by how strange it is. It was clear to me that why it wasn't a commercial hit. But I've always had the impression that was that one kind of got lost in the shuffle, and critically too. I think it was at the time where, in 2007 there was a lot of press around this idea of quote unquote mumblecore. So this, kind of after Mutual Appreciation came out, then really this notion took hold in the media to the small niche of media that follows or cares about these things, that there was a movement going on, and then you get all the stuff that goes with that, and then you get backlash and blah, blah, blah. And so I don't think that was great for Beeswax. I think most of the press that came out around Beeswax was kind of all through the prism of, is this mumblecore? Is mumblecore dead? Is mumblecore stupid? Whatever that was. And I didn't really get, so I think that made it a little harder for people to see the movie on its own terms.
That's really interesting because just 20 minutes ago I was decrying categories, writing labels, and here you mentioned this word. So you're saying that played a role. You're saying that wasn't only positive. It was a kind of what would you say that it kind of
as anybody who's ever been lumped in those categories, it's a blessing and a curse. It's nice.
Yeah.
it's nice that it press attention in a certain way, but then you also get, if you have to ride a wave of a fad, then that crashes at some point. It's not, and for me, the movie was never about. I mean, the last thing I would ever do is say, let me cash in on the mumblecore fad. That had nothing to do with my thought process ever. I don't mean to blame media per se for that movie not getting more attention. I think I do think it's a very strange movie and a very quiet movie, and nothing that would be likely to be a box office smash whenever you released it. But I do love the movie a lot, and there's some part of me I think that will always suspect that it's came together as well as anything I'll ever do.
Yeah, I have to agree with that because I rewatched it a couple of days ago actually, and I was really struck by how well the movie's held up, and also how influential it is. I mean, I see again. A lot of people, you say it may not have just been big success, but I think that film maybe inspired people or had influence. I think, don't you?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. Yeah, it seems to me it has. But influence. So how do we this road, this maybe rocky road from beeswax to computer chess? Is that the next feature?
Yeah. Well, I think with beeswax, I kind of felt, certainly I was a little stung by the fact that there was, fewer eyeballs on it and a little less critical reception for whatever that was, and we spent more money on it. Not again by movie standards, still a pittance, but I did kind of feel like I wasn't sure where else, and part of me would have been happy if I spent the rest of my life making little 16 millimeter character stories with non-professional actors. That would not have been a bad fate for me, but I did worry about because it was never meant to be sustainable, and so it wasn't sustainable. I think. And also, I was undergoing these, extraordinary changes in my personal life at that time. A couple months after Beeswax premiered, I got married. A couple months after that, my wife was pregnant, and a lot was moving quickly. I think I wrote a screenplay at that time, which was intended to be, that would have been my first attempt to go do something with professional actors on a slightly larger financial scale.
Okay, what was that? What was that project?
Well, it remains unmade. But it was, and I've rewritten it a bunch of times, and I still pull it out and look at it and think about it sometimes, and. It's a script I like a lot, and maybe I'll get a chance someday to do some version of it. But it was a thing about teenagers as a kind of a teenage revolt, and they're in a summer class, and
oh wow,
and there's a little rebellion, but it's kind of equally about the teenagers and their instructors trying to hold this thing together. It was a little bit of a kind of a political story about idealism versus pragmatism, and it was a script I liked a lot and I put a lot into, but and it felt for a moment that we came close. There was a famous movie star, and I went to this guy's house, and he seemed like he wanted to do the movie, and that was exciting, and we started to turn the gears to try to do that. And then a few weeks later, he dropped out, and then the project fell apart, as these things do. And we tried a couple more times. Then there was another actor later who was going to do it, and it's a deviously hard project to pull off, in part because there are so many young people in it. And
so you're saying that one of the difficult things about this project is the amount of characters in the script. Is that what?
Yeah, it's a huge ensemble piece, and a lot of that ensemble is 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And so one thing that I think always tripped us up on it is the way that big movies are made. There's a whole lot of like, you wait and wait and wait for years, and then the money falls out of the sky, and then you have 3 weeks to pull everything together.
That's right.
And that's never really going to work for a movie where I needed to go find all these kids, and they had to be great. I couldn't quite. That was something that got us in trouble time and again as we tried to pull the movie together. It was like there was no way to approach it on that schedule of, we're going to wait until the big star says yes, and then we're going to have 3 weeks to do everything. We needed more lead time. And so anyway, so that didn't happen, but there was a certain point in 2010, I think, or maybe 11, my son was born in 2010, and there I was at home with a baby, and I had a real anxiety about whether or not I had a future as a filmmaker, and I could imagine now the scenario in which I never made another film. Because life had changed, I had responsibilities, and and everything I had done in the past was so based on not having responsibilities. I always felt, to some degree, still feel like the greatest. I think because movies are so expensive and so time-consuming and so difficult to make, most sane people put sustainability at the top of their priority list. You don't make the movie unless you believe it has a good shot at making money back, or at least making you enough money to go on to the next one. And I always put that at the bottom of my priority list because I felt like it freed me up to do a lot of other things, to make movies that were not going to get made any other way. And so, once I started to worry about sustainability, it was very easy to imagine not films. I don't know what I would do instead because I'm not really qualified to do anything else.
Well, I would imagine you would write scripts for other people, or no? Were you? I mean, I could see.
Oh yeah, I've done a little bit of that, and I love doing that. But it's also, that's not something to really make a to make a reliable career of that. I would have to do a lot more hustling than I do. So I've been very lucky to have had a handful of those jobs kind of fall in my lap. And I love them, and I need more of them.
May I ask what some of the script writing you've done? What sorts of pictures or projects or TV or anything? What comes to mind?
I wrote it. Well, my first Hollywood job was I worked for Scott Rudin, who has a real history of going and finding, kind of getting a farm team together, going out and finding young people who maybe he'll want to work with. He thinks ahead 10, 20 years in the future.
Wow.
So he hired me to adapt a book called Indecision by a guy named Ben Kunkel.
Yes, I've read that.
Yeah, it's a really fun book, and it was a really, at the time it came out, it was certainly a well-received, well-publicized book. And so that was a great education, writing a bunch of drafts of that for Scott. Of course, the movie never got made, but I was thrilled to get paid for working on it. And I later, a buddy and I wrote a romantic comedy for Scott that never got made.
Wow.
I wrote a pilot for HBO. And most recently, the only Hollywood thing I've done that actually has gotten made was I just last year or a year and a half ago was working for Disney. Their Lady and the Tramp reboot, which was certainly an interesting experience.
Do you want to say more about that? Because it is if you did like a surface glance, that would strike you as being contrary or different to other things you've done, either real or apparent difference. So, what comes to mind about doing that and working on an old story like that for a big company like Disney?
Sure.
I imagine that could have its plus side. It could have its opportunities or challenges artistically, or at least interest. So what comes to mind about that? It
was great fun and great and incredible luck, really. There was a producer, a guy named Brigham Taylor, who has spent most of his career at Disney, who's a really smart, interesting guy. And he's also, luckily for me, he has this kind of weird strain of indie taste. He's the guy who brought Alex Ross Perry into the Disney fold to write this book.
Okay.
And so I had a breakfast meeting with him, and we were chatting about, what he was doing, what I was doing, and what was out there. I was certainly well aware that Disney was remaking everything they'd ever done, but I assumed that most of those properties were taken, and most of them were. But Brigham mentioned that Lady and the Tramp was still out there, and it was something that he was interested in doing, and that certainly struck a chord with me, because I think of and I'm not a Disney expert at all, but it is kind of unique amongst the Disney classics, in as much as, perversely, it's about dogs, but I think it's a much more human story than most. Most of their stories are magical fairyland things, and this one is very earthbound, and basically a romantic comedy. It was something that I felt like I kind of knew my way around, and very character based. And so I went and watched the original with my kids, and took some notes and had some ideas, and just started kicking things around with Brigham, and eventually was lucky enough to. And I never would have gotten in the door without him, but we went in and we pitched the Disney brass, and I got hired to write a bunch of drafts for them. Now, after that, of course, then they brought in other writers, and this is the way that those kind of movies are made. So I haven't seen the finished movie yet. I know that a fair bit was rewritten since I last had my hands on it, but I'm very curious to see how it turns out.
Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you.
When are you going to look at that?
I assume when everybody else does, it will be. It's one of the things they're going to launch their streaming service with. Disney's will have its own streaming service. They launch in November, and this will be one of their flagship titles.
Well, I'm going to watch it for sure. So going back then again to computer chess, because that even though there's a getting the thread there, so going.
Yeah. Well, I was afraid I would never make another movie, because I had written this thing that was, that this teenagers project that we would have needed millions of dollars for, and because I had just had this panic sense that if I don't make something right now, I'll never make anything again.
Yep.
But I did have computer chess had been a fantasy in the back of my head for years. And it had seemed like, the most impossible project I could imagine, the weirdest thing I could think of. And maybe a year or two before that, I'd been having breakfast with a friend, the filmmaker Jeff Nichols, who did Shotgun Stories and Mud, and who he lives in Austin, and he's a great guy and a very energetic guy. And so I think we had been talking about impossible projects, or things we dreamed of doing that we knew we could never get away with. And I mentioned this computer chess idea to him, and he basically dared me to write a treatment. So I did. I wrote like an 8-page treatment, and I think I sent it to Jeff, and I didn't think about it again until 2011, when I thought, oh my God, I need to make something. Let me make this. And it was a crazy. I referred to Funny Haha before as leaping off the cliff, and this was just. I don't know. This was leaping off several cliffs.
This is more of a quantum. I don't know what you would call.
You're right. It's like leaping off the planet.
For those that haven't seen, again, one of the great things about doing these shows is hopefully people come on, and if by some weird fluke of cult, they haven't seen computer chess, maybe they'll see it. They go. So. The leaping off the planet. So.
Well, I called up a couple producers, and basically said to them, got an 8-page treatment here. I don't have a screenplay. It's the only thing I've done that I haven't, written a full screenplay for. Although I had a very detailed treatment, and then the treatment got more and more fleshed out in pre-production. But I said, I've got an 8-page treatment, no screenplay. I want to shoot this on, kind of experimental technology that we're going to have to figure out how to do it. I want to use these old cameras, and I don't have anybody cast, and I don't have any money, and it's a huge ensemble, and it's a period piece, and it's on a kind of arcane subject matter that I don't really know anything about. And we start shooting in 3 months, and are you in or out? And luckily for me, Houston King and Alex Lipschultz, who produced the movie, said, okay, sure, we're in, and came to Austin. We just started pulling everything together. But it's the kind of thing where, if we'd had a moment to think about it, we couldn't have done it. There's both practically and aesthetically, there's no reason that movie should have worked. We just ran, and until it was too late to stop.
Well, and in that sense, it did work. So something about that, the energy of what you just talked about, made the film in it, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, I have to say one of my great regrets is not being on the set of that. I was supposed to come to Austin and be in the film, wasn't I? Or at least play something musical.
I'm sure we approached you about it.
Yeah, I mean, you understand that was when the film was in production is when my father died. And I had to go to my father's funeral. So it's funny how life is. So that's just to clear after all these years. That's the reason for my inability to go to Austin. But I would have loved to have done that.
Well, your music is in there, and I'm sure your spirit is.
My spirit certainly is. So, just the characters of that film, just all the actors in this convention. Talk about evoking this motel in 1980, and these people, and it's just. And there's even an encounter session. You have like a kind of an S-Tech group, right, in the film that's meeting and doing relationship counseling, and you even have them approach this poor kid, right, in a very awkward circumstance. I mean, all of that. Talk about what comes to mind about those parts of the film, or that anything.
It's hard to reconstruct. I think every filmmaker, every artist, I think, you read so many people talking about their process and feeling like, well, I was just a conduit. It was out there, and I just tried to transcribe it, and I always feel that way. And I think particularly with this movie, because one question I would get asked over and over again as we would travel with it and do Q&As, people would say, well, where did this come from? And I can tell you kind of bits and pieces of, what first got me thinking about the cameras, or what first got me thinking about computer chess as a subject matter. But to be honest, I don't really remember where the whole thing came from. I know that there had been that moment when Jeff had challenged me to write the treatment. I don't really remember sitting down and writing that, or what I was thinking, or how that came out. And that was what we were chasing most of the time, was just trying to flesh out and figure out that 8-page treatment. As far as, we needed a perfect cast, we needed perfect locations, we needed incredibly talented production design and costume folks, and all of that just appeared magically, which is what always has to happen with a movie. It just this seemed like a pretty extreme case of the right elements being there at the right time.
So you say this is a case of ultra magic, or
ultra magic? There you go.
Ultra magic for computer chess. Now, so you're in post production, and the film obviously has a reception. What's the reception of this film after the beeswax and other things? What was the talk about a little bit about that, because I imagine that is its own story or its own.
It was exciting. It was exciting. We took it to Sundance. It was my first time ever going to Sundance, and it felt like we had buzz, whatever that is. And I was very grateful that I think it was received in the spirits that we intended it. That we'd set out to make something unique. And in fact, I was thinking about this the other day because somebody had said something to me about how unique the movie was, and that was really very much part of its design. It was designed to be unrepeatable. And I could have told you a month before we shot it that I would never make anything like it again, and and maybe no one would. It was just meant to be this thing that appeared from the ether and then vanished back into the ether, and for people to see that and feel that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting because the film is very specific.
Mm-hmm.
It's specific to the year in which it's set, and everything from the clothes and the haircuts and these computer mavens. These they're kind of geniuses. These people at this convention are kind of unusual people. I mean, they're people that certainly in the real world made an enormous historical impact on today. If you think about it, so the kinds of the people that are at this convention are people that had, maybe they didn't know it, but they were ahead of the curve and they were kind of creating the future to a large extent. But with all that specificity, interestingly enough, computer chess is going to last. There's something actually, dare I say, eternal for all that. And maybe because of that, right? So I can imagine people 20 years from now liking computer chess, right? It's interesting.
We'll see. Yeah. There's so much we don't know about 20 years from now.
That's true. Or 10 years from now, or 8 years from now. Mm-hmm. Right. But it's that specificity maybe worked out in your favor, the film's favor.
Well, and as you point out, I mean, it is so much. It was something that, in its conception, when I was sitting down and writing that treatment, I don't think any part of me was thinking about relevance or topicality. And it was really only as we got deeper, and maybe as we were shooting, that it was starting to dawn on me that that I was making something that was going to have a certain degree of topicality and zeitgeistiness. I mean, I tend to fear the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
I'd kind of rather stay away from it, to be honest. And for whatever reason, once in a while, I kind of happen to stumble toward it, which is exciting and scary because it's bigger than you. I always just want to focus on the work, and I want to focus on what excites me about the work and hope it will be received in that sense. And in a way, it's a very different movie in a very different situation, but Support the Girls also
has the same fate, right? Because people are seizing on the film, I guess, for their own political purposes. And that, in one hand, you're saying, well, that's a good thing because people are seeing the movie and excited about it. But I guess you're saying, on the other hand, it was very much for you an aesthetic thing. You're trying to make this film about these people's lives. And that's what's important to you, these people's lives, and rather than...
well, you hope it'll be relevant, or you hope it will be a worthwhile piece of work no matter what today's headline is. And Support the Girls was just a very particular, very strange journey from writing something that at the time I was writing, I thought would be, I sat and I worried that it would seem irrelevant to people because I was just writing about these highway side restaurants that nobody pays much attention to unless you're a regular. And then to go from that to, by the time the movie is premiering, it's like I almost worry that now it's like too hot, too topical, and we're going to get in trouble for that because of such incredible seismic changes in the culture over the course of those few years.
Yeah,
that was a particular experience. But again, very, very lucky to feel like ultimately, for the most part, the film was certainly received in the spirit we intended.
While we're on that subject, if indeed, do you mind talking with the audience of this show about any possible differences in working with what you would call a non-professional actor, like someone who was a roommate versus a Regina Hall, or a very
Sure.
or Guy Pearce? I mean, I'm guessing there's probably some similarities underneath that, amidst the differences of. But it's up to you. What comes to mind when you think about that question or that?
Yeah, well, it's all human beings, and they're all doing the same job. So in that, of course, there's a lot of it's not that different. But I think mostly, I think the simplest way I can, or that I break it down for myself, is that with non-professionals, and I would point out too that all the non-professionals I work with, while they don't have long resumes as actors, they're all really talented, really good natural actors. They're all really good at acting, which is why they're in the movie.
That's right.
So it's not I can't do it with just anybody off the street.
Of course, yeah.
But essentially, those are people who come in with a lot of talent and not a lot of craft and not a lot of presupposition. So we kind of we start in some degree of chaos, or maybe sometimes they don't know what I want, or they don't know what they should be doing, or they don't know what's how you're supposed to act in a movie because they've never done it before. And then, but their instincts are good. Mm-hmm. And then we start from there, and it's my job maybe to impose just enough order that the movie comes to life. That I have my structure, I have what I need to get across, I have what I'm interested in, and I can nudge just enough in that direction that it's the right kind of chaos. And for me, that's very exciting because the right kind of chaos is that's my sweet spot. That's my favorite stuff. Mm-hmm. Whereas with professionals, I realized I kind of had to learn to go somewhat in the opposite direction. People like Guy Pearce, Kobe Smulders, Kevin Corrigan, who are in Results, Regina Hall, who's in Sport the Girls, so many great actors in Sport the Girls. Mm-hmm. These are people who have been, all those people I just mentioned have been doing this for decades and work a lot.
Yep.
They all have very different styles. No two are the same. No two professionals are the same. No two non-professionals are the same. Mm-hmm. So always there's that aspect of it, of just trying to learn your way around the person and how you can be most useful to them. But there is, I think, a tendency, or professionals learn over time to be professional, which means to show up very prepared, sometimes almost bulletproof, because I think if you work that much, at some point, any of those actors have probably had the experience of showing up to a set that was, to whatever degree disorganized, or maybe the director's not paying attention, or maybe the director's asleep or drunk or what, you never know. And they still have to stand up there and deliver something really solid. So they're all in the habit of being really solid, really, really strong, really good. And that's nice for me. Then my fear is, oh no, but what if I don't want it bulletproof. I want to wear some of that down. I want some vulnerability. I want to allow the opportunity for mistakes, because mistakes are often, where some of the most interesting things creep in. So I think I realized with professionals, I kind of had to go the opposite direction that I was used to. Instead of putting just a little bit of order onto the chaos, I was kind of trying to do the opposite. I was trying to get just a little bit of chaos back into the order, because they have no trouble bringing order.
Yeah, so it's an order. You said they're bulletproof, and they're coming in because of their training, right, as actors in terms of the craft.
Well, I think, and I don't, I realize that sounding more insulting than I mean it to. It's not. I think that has to be in their repertoire. They have to. They have all learned to be bulletproof. It doesn't mean they don't have access to vulnerability. I think every good actor does. And in fact, that was maybe the biggest lesson I learned on Results. I think, of course, I was intimidated by all these people who have so much more experience than I do. And I think part of me thought, well, this will be different because there'll be no insecurities at all. And then I quickly realized that, of course, actors are nothing but insecurities. That
yeah.
no matter how long you've been doing it, no matter how good you are at it, I think you have to retain those insecurities. And in fact, that's kind of the method. That's sort of what actors and directors do together. Is actors show up, regardless of their level of experience, with their insecurities, and they present those to the director, and then in working through those together, that's how a performance is born. So that was unchanged. That was the same as working with non-professionals.
Yeah, I guess that's when I mentioned similarities. I guess you expressed much better than I could. In your words, what I was kind of trying to drive at, when I intuited was the case. And that could be just connected to your role as being a direct writer-director, that if somebody were to ask you, Andrew, what are you doing as a director, you could almost answer that you're sort of the conduit for that to happen, and that you're the person that knows how to get those results or get those things to happen on a set in kind of a living present.
Yeah, it's a very weird job. I mean, it's directors. If you go to a movie set, you're going to see, depending on what the size of the production, you might see a dozen people, or you might see hundreds of people, all kind of scurrying around, and all of those people have a very particular thing they're doing and a very particular skill, except the director, who kind of does nothing. The director is just there to chat with everybody else. And but ultimately somehow that if it's working, you need that person to give that the thing. It's person. It's a very mysterious process. It's always, because I always feel intimidated on a set because everybody else is so good at their jobs, and I don't really have a job except chatting with everybody else.
And so you're saying that's the job, the chatting with the people might be at least part of the job. Yeah.
Just setting a tone or whatever that is. It's trying to hold the big picture in your head.
Well, holding the big picture in your head is what you're doing. That's what the characters in your film, computer chess, are good at, right? The chess is about holding. That's interesting. So you wrote a film. There's a connection there, because I think people that are chess players, that's what they do.
Sure. Although, none of those characters, well, maybe with the exception of the Jerry Perry character, most of those characters are not actually chess players. They're programmers. Okay. So they're dismantling chess,
Well, they're dismantling to see what makes something up, right? So they're which is maybe connected. I don't know. We didn't talk enough about movies that you love. I mean, either in the past or now, because I recognize you were watching movies while at Harvard and younger. And I know that you're on record as saying Rocky 3 is your favorite Rocky, or I don't know. We could talk. So,
no, it's not my favorite, but it's the one that was my gateway drug. That was, I think, I saw that when I was young enough to. That was the first one I saw, and it took me a moment to kind of understand that 3 meant that there were 2 others. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, certainly the Rocky movies have been huge for me, and I think about them all the time and talk about them all the time, and maybe a little too addicted to them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those films, or what you take from them, because they're wonderful films. I try to watch the first one every few years. Mm-hmm. It's so well written and so well acted. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind immediately when you think about those films, or what they mean to you, or either it could be anything. It could be acting, it could be plot, or it could be thematic things or concerns. Just, you can riff on the Rocky films just for a minute.
They're fascinating. It's fascinating. The scale and the scope of it is, it's unbelievable that there are 8 of those now. And, I think I've not too tongue-in-cheek, but I've compared them before to the Truffaut Antoine Doinel movies.
Yeah.
It's rare, if not unheard of, that you get a kind of blockbuster franchise that really is just following a guy through the course of his life. I don't think, if I'm not mistaken, there's not a single gun ever in a Rocky movie.
That's right.
There's certainly not a spaceship, and usually any franchise that goes 8 movies, I cannot think of another one that doesn't have a gun or a spaceship.
So you're saying the absence of those two objects makes it close to the Truffaut done well. Yeah, you're right about that. It is kind of the same. It is the same thing, really.
They're very different, but yeah. But Doinel is, and you start with Doinel as a kid, of course, but you follow him through his life, and he is always, and the story of his life is told through the story as any Frenchman would do. It's always about his encounters with these knockout women, whereas Rocky's American, and so it's kind of all about his career.
Yeah, it's work oriented. Yeah,
and all about his failure to retire. That's a fascinating aspect of it to me as well. It is, and you kind of, over the course of 8 movies, you sort of tease this out, where it is this weird epic tale of a somebody who's addicted to his career. Mickey is telling Rocky to retire in Rocky 1. And it's all about a guy who kind of can't let go and keep going, and then ultimately there's this weird shadow story too across the series where Rocky is not always the best parent. He's a hero, and he's this great, incredibly pure figure who always triumphs morally or otherwise, but then over the course of the thing has this very strained relationship with his son and never really figures out how to parent. I find that totally fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Well, the films explore that, right, to some degree. I mean, there's intelligence in that, which I think is noteworthy given that franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
And they're all over the place. I mean, they respond so much to the times, of course. I'm
sorry. So you mean sociologically, the films have a certain amount of topicality that is of interest because of when it was in production? Is that what you mean, or something else other than that?
Movies are all blockbusters. All have to respond to the concerns of the times, and the 70s Rocky is very different than 80s Rocky. And I find that fascinating about series in general. I'm always, I don't have the same place in my heart for them, but I've always was interested in those the slasher movies for how they changed, how they adapted from sequel to sequel.
I mean, you could look at films that way, and maybe looking at films in that way connects you to your roots at the environmental studies in Harvard. Because that's actually what you might say is a documentarian or sociological, anthropological way of looking at the thing, which, after all, is part of the mix, right?
Yeah, well, I'm going to forget now maybe it was one of the French New Wave guys. There's some filmmaker who has a very nice quote about how every film is a documentary of its own making, and that's absolutely the case. And that's part of, to me, what's very exciting about movies and very magical about them is that I just a couple nights ago I went and saw not a beloved classic, but I went and saw Easy Living from I want to say 1937 or so. And you can go and you can sit in the theater.
I love that film. It may not be beloved by others, but it's beloved by me. But go ahead.
Yeah. But there's still enough of that window open, and more. The better the film is, the more you feel that window open, where you feel 1937 come alive on the screen and in the room around you. It's a pretty magical experience, and not something that you really get very well by other means. And so that's something I've always loved about movies, is that a good movie can bring its whole era with it through the screen to you.
Yeah, it's actually I think an underappreciated or underappreciated part of film as a genre or form. Mm-hmm. When it is talked about, it's often talked about in kind of a cheap and superficial way, this thing we're talking about right now. But I think you could do it in this kind of really deep way. So that, for example, I think you and I were watching at the same time, Celie and Julie Go Boating. Were we at the same screening? I think at the Brattle.
Probably.
Yeah, and so watching that, of course, it's its own film, totally unique, but it's also 1975, right, in Paris, and you feel that when you watch that you actually feel like you're time traveling to 1975 in Paris.
It's a beautiful thing, and the longer cinema goes on, you realize how ephemeral it is. I mean, I think people, I don't know, sometimes you think you can make anything anywhere, but these things have their moments. And again, as I was saying about computer chess, I think we knew when we were making it, we caught something that's not going to be here again. You can make another weird movie, you can make a movie that's better than that, but you can't make that movie ever again. And to a large degree that's true for every movie, but it's when something feels special in particular, that's quite exciting. And it's the hardest thing to try to look for and push for in industrial models, which is how most films are made. They kind of have to be made on with an assembly line mentality because people have to work for a living and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not particular and it's not specific and if you're not capturing something that's really right there in the air, then what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes the point. Is there anything else you want to add about pre-production on Support the Girls? Anything that comes to mind that's noteworthy or important to mention?
Pre-production? No, I don't know. I mean,
or production, or anything about it. Anything, since that's a newer film. Anything?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, there was that weird experience of it kind of becoming relevant as we were doing it to the culture. Speaking of your interaction with the culture, but it was, just yet another in a long series of lucky breaks. We were very lucky again to have that one come together as nicely as it did, and to have Regina Hall be our what do you call it? What do you call the thing that holds everything else together? Or the top of the arc, the keystone.
Yeah.
The keystone of the movie. Because I knew, in writing that, to some degree, I was kind of maybe semi-consciously trying to go back to something I hadn't really done since Funny Ha Ha, which was that Funny Ha Ha was a movie where I followed one woman around for the whole movie, and that was it. And there were, not that many shots in the movie that she wasn't in.
That's right. She's in a way, she's like your Travis Bickle, right?
Sure.
In Taxi Driver. Yeah. So you're saying you did that in Support the Girls that you're.
Yeah, I wanted to try that again. It had been a while. I think with Mutual Appreciation, I'd gotten to the triangle thing, and Beeswax was kind of another triangle, and Results was another triangle, and I like the idea of trying to get back to just I'm gonna follow a woman around for 90 minutes and see what I get. And so of course, then you need the right woman to hold the movie, because there is, to the same degree that Funny Ha lives and breathes and only exists by the grace of Dollenmeyer's performance. I needed somebody to step up and do that again for this movie. And, it was extraordinary luck that we got Regina, extraordinary luck that she was as committed as she was, as great as she was. And then also just in an external sense, I think we caught her at a very nice moment in her career when, after working steadily and doing great work for 20 years, she was starting to get a little groundswell of attention, and we could ride that press, which was nice. But I'm hugely grateful to her for taking the risk on us and for making that work, because that's a really tough character too. It's not.
Oh wow, is it ever? I mean, that whole film is tough. I mean, to Support the Girls. One of the things I love so much about the movie, there's many things I love about that film, but it's tough-minded.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a toughness to it, but there's also this optimism, this sweetness. Mm. That's a thing. If somebody would ask me what is the thing in an Andrew Bujalski movie you can expect, no matter the movie, that those two things will be in there. It's very hard to evoke, but Support the Girl certainly has it. And in general, before I want to talk about, thank you again, by the way, my feminist singer-songwriter song Without Words.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's this long classical solo piano piece I wrote for my hard listening, and you used that in your closing credits. Thank you. That's incredible. So thank you for that. Talk about why that, is that sort of just things came together, you heard it, and you said, well, this is, I don't know.
Well, it's also, it appears earlier in the movie, and right. It was a very specific kind of beat where
trying to get rid of that rock song or whatever they were listening to radio, right?
Yeah. Regina's character's in the car with James LeGros' character, her boss, and he's very angry, and there's a kind of uncomfortable silence in the car, and he turns on the radio and turns up this country song real loud, and then she's trying to calm him down. So she flips the station, and first there's a kind of NPR-ish voice, and then I figured I wanted her to go somewhere low on the dial.
Yep.
So where I put the talk stuff there, and then maybe some less commercial sound. We played with a few options, but I had the idea of trying a song there, and it felt really good and really fun for the scene. And then once I had it in there, it was also it was nice to bring it back in the closing credits. Something felt appropriate about it.
Totally appropriate, and I want to thank you for that because it's something, because when I wrote that music, I mean, I can tell you the genesis of that piece. I was actually trying to work in languages I don't normally do. Sometimes I do that in my composition. I'll approach a musical language and see what's in this language to use, because generally my language is sort of partly jazz, but also some non-jazz things, Hollywood and Broadway. And I thought, well, what about this singer-songwriter folk language? And so literally when I wrote that piece, I locked myself in a room and listened to nothing but Laura Nyro and Joni Mitchell and Carly Janice Ian and Carly Simon. I engrossed myself in this kind of music, and out came that piece. But given the way I often do things, of course, it's going to be the context of utilizing that folk material, the spirit of that, but it's in the context of a classical piano piece. So there's a formal complexity, and that's what I like to do. I like to put things together. I like to use, often in my music, I always like to use what I would call popular elements, pop elements, folk elements, but I want to put them in this much more extended, formally complex setting, as if to say, well, what's the difference? Or as if to say, it's all one. So that's the only way I can put it, speaking on the fly like that. But
it's fascinating transmutation.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that connects to your filmmaking practice at all. I know you may not think of it in the same ways, but I'm wondering maybe the question about genre, or what transcends genre, or actors, or
I've learned the hard way that at times I think I maybe for career reasons it would be nice if I didn't have a perspective and a voice, but I do. And so when I write a romantic comedy, when I write something that's meant to feel like a genre piece, it's still, my voice is still going to be in there whether I like it or not. And in the case of something like Results, I go and make the movie, and I embrace that, and I have fun with it, and I love that movie. I think it's a hindrance, certainly, in terms of having a career and getting paid to write things, because it is a particular voice, and it's not always the one that people are looking for.
What do you attribute that to? Like, I'm somebody who's very much an outsider, and I've always found your films a source of, actually, this is going to sound weird, but have a pedagogical effect on me. Like, I've actually learned so much about human beings from your films, because you portray things in films. Actually, I've learned so much about how people interact and about the nature of human psychology. I've learned as much, if not more, from your films than a lot of other films. So clearly you're gifted. Clearly you understand people. You understand emotional intelligence, and you understand how people tick. So for me, those things are very entertaining, and those things are very interesting. So I can't imagine what it would be like to, like some people to be not interested in that, or maybe put off by that, or find it. It's interesting how different people respond to the same artwork, what they get from it or what they don't.
It's fascinating, but it's also, the artwork isn't. That's kind of the final piece of the puzzle. It's like I've certainly always felt that way. That the movie's not done until people have seen it and responded to it. It's not. It isn't anything until it's bounced off of somebody else's consciousness, and you never know what you're going to get there. That's the one piece that's completely out of your control.
If you had to guess what it is in your life, either from birth or pre-birth or whatever it is, that gave you this gift of understanding, and also enacting in film this understanding human relationship, very humanist dimension, which I think is sorely lacking in even in some films about character. What would you say? Where do you think that comes from, or do you think it's just innate, or do you think it's that you have this? You have you understand that so well. What would you attribute that to?
I think I have a particular. I don't know how well I understand anything, but I don't know. I'm insecure, and so I was always trying to pay attention to what everybody else was thinking and doing and why they were doing it, and so many mysteries. I mean, the more you hang out with people, the more mysterious they are. But it was always, that's what's always interesting to me about everything, it's politics, and it's everything that happens on Earth happens because of the oddities of human brain chemistry. Certainly there's plenty of indications that we're headed into unbelievable global crises now, all because of the oddities of human brain chemistry and how we react to each other and how we react to information. And so that's always been what I've paid attention to, often to the exclusion of paying attention to anything else.
So I guess your answer is that this has actually been your research project, or kind of, so you're saying you're looking at this thing that maybe other people weren't looking at so intently or taking for granted. And so because you weren't taking it for granted, you're saying it gave you, I think, artistic, material to make your films.
Perhaps. Well, I mean, certainly I would also say, as I've developed as a writer, I know I'm only interested I can only get out of bed for a project that I don't think somebody else is going to do better, and there's a kind of, self-defensiveness about that, I suppose. But if I'm going to try to, I've never had the instinct to try to jump on a Hollywood trend, and you can, if you time it right, if you do it right, of course there's great money and sometimes acclaim to be made in jumping on the right trend at the right moment. But I always assume there are a lot of smart, talented, ego-driven people who are doing that same thing at that moment, and who will do it better than I will. And so I'd rather go find my own little weird corner that I know nobody else is going to be in, and tinker away myself and do it at my own pace with my own enthusiasms, and know that no matter what, whether the movie's good or not, no matter whether or not it's a disaster, at least it's mine, and at least we did it on our own terms. And when I say mine, also, it's also a great joy to part of the reason I'm not a novelist, besides the lack of attention span, is that it's a real thrill to get then, whether it is a dozen people or 100 people together, to make something come to life and come to life in ways that are ultimately going to be better than what I could do on my own, more interesting, more textured, more strange. And again, that comes from documentary. Let's go make a documentary about what we're doing right together. And that's something, my wife is a novelist, and
yeah, I wanted to talk about that because I loved All the Houses. That's the only novel of hers I've read thus far. But I was happy to read that, and I'm very much looking forward to her new work.
Yeah, the Bay Conjectures.
It's about Simone Weil. Is it correct?
W-E-I-L. Yeah, Bay's. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it right, but it's a beautiful book. And I think you'll respond to it. If anybody who's listening, Karen Olson, O-L-S-S-O-N.
Karen Olson, O-L-S-S-O-N. Her new novel is. Her new novel is historical fiction of the sort, right?
Well, it's a real. Speaking of unrepeatable things, it's quite unique structurally and kind of genre-wise. I mean, it's. I think some reviewer somewhere compared it to a turducken, which I liked. So it's kind of it's almost a book inside of a book inside of a book. It's sort of a biography of Simone and Andre Weil, but also tucked inside that is a kind of memoir, and tucked inside that is kind of a philosophical essay. It's really just Karen, through thinking about these fascinating historical figures, but also thinking about her. Andre Weil was a mathematician. Karen was a math major herself years ago.
Oh, okay.
So she's thinking about math, thinking about philosophy, thinking about really kind of all the grand questions, but it's a very ground level book. I think that's part of what's so magical about it, is that it really is just someone I think very, very relatably sitting there and thinking about these huge ideas about creativity and truth and beauty and but thinking about them in how we feel them in our own daily lives and how these extraordinary people felt them in their lives. So yeah, it's quite an extraordinary book.
Well, good. I'm glad to tell people about it. Where could people should get that book?
Oh, anywhere they want. Hopefully it's at your local bookstore if your local bookstore still exists, but it's also on Amazon and all those things as well.
Okay, and you obviously want people to support the girls who have not yet seen it. Every man, woman, and child.
Sure.
Where would you like people to watch that? Or what is
again, wherever you want. I think it's for the streamers out there. I believe it's on Hulu, but it's also I think you can download it on Amazon or any of those pay sites, and anybody who still has DVDs and Blu-rays, we got those too.
Excellent. Well, we've been talking for a good length of time. I've really enjoyed this immensely, Andrew, and it's really great to go into detail about some of these things, rather than talking about them in a superficial way or talking about them in a way that relies too much on labels or media stuff and all that. So I want to thank you for doing so and coming on this show.
Been good fun. Thank you.
Is there anything else before we, as you know, I hate to say goodbye, but we're going to have to say goodbye at some point. Is there anything else you want to talk about or that's on your mind about these films or anything? Or
oh no, my mind is a blank, Mitch. It has been for as long as you've known me.
Okay. Well, all right. So since that's the case now, I think we're gonna say goodbye. But thanks very much, Andrew. This was a treat.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you.